was pretty confident this was a scam. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. I haven't seen a box this big since I bought that collection of limited colors edition Les Pauls, and the guy shipped 3 of them in one box. But anyways, we are reviewing one of my favorite Les Paul models today, and we'll get to the whole questionable story of how this one was listed in a minute. But this is not the first time we've seen this on the show, but it's the first time in a long while since I've had one of these. This is the true Buckethead Signature Les Paul. It's not the studio that we just talked about 6 months ago. But in case you've never seen one of these things before, let's talk about it. This is an oversized baritone Les Paul. That's why these things are vastly different from anything else. And I always warn people, be careful playing a Buckethead Les Paul because it will ruin every single other Les Paul for you. And let's face it, regular Les Pauls are awesome. So for me to say that, I think this side-by-side comparison shows you what we're talking about here. It is oversized, it's chambered, and that's right, you heard me right, it is baritone, so instead of 24 3/4, it's 27-inch scale length. Now there's other baritones within Gibson's categories, such as the 28-inch Les Paul Studio, but those ones have always looked strange to me, like obnoxiously long neck. But the Bucketheads don't look or feel incorrect due to the body being larger. But if you're more of a fan of the SG body shape, there is a very similarly spec'd out one to this that is not an official Buckethead signature. There's also an interesting Baritone Explorer done up in Silverburst finish. But this is the signature model for a guy named Buckethead. Now at first, you might be turned off. He has this weird KFC bucket and or a blank one, depending on what era of his that you're listening to. And he's got a white mask, quite the mysterious dude. But I first ran across his music in Guitar Hero 2, and I've just loved his approach to guitar ever since. And he has a ridiculous amount of songs. There's the big top ones, Jordan, Soothsayer, etc. And if you don't like his more shred style approach, he's got tons of regular melodic stuff as well. Don't judge the guy based off of the persona and costume. This is one of those cases where if the costume is weirding you out, don't worry, dive into his music and you'll be okay. The Buckethead Les Paul was first introduced in late 2009, around October. But your main production run will be from 2010 to about 2011. Have I seen some 2012s? Yes, it's just kind of a range here. I've never seen an official number of true signatures produced, but there was also a studio that a lot of people say around 500-ish of those were made, starting in 2011. Now I have a whole video that tells you the differences between the two, but the main things to know, the true signature has the gloss nitro rather than satin. It has body binding along the top. It has the ebony fretboard instead of baked maple. It's got a slightly larger nut width, but the guts are all the same. It still has the 2 kill switches, double white ceramic pickups. It's got the push-pull pot. Now personally, I really like the Studios. Baked maple feels great on those, and the satin finishes tend to not yellow as much as the true nitros. This one's far from the worst yellowing I've ever seen, but it's definitely there. But besides those main specs, there's a few nuances to know about these Buckethead signatures, and I'm all of a sudden really pumped for this, because when I bought this, I didn't realize it. This is one of the early ones that has the 5-ply binding. So if you're curious what the ply is, you've got the white, black, and then there's kind of another white layer that's a bit hidden. It's the number of bands around the guitar creating the binding. So the early ones have 5-ply, whereas the later ones utilize a regular 7-ply Les Paul custom style binding. So I am actually really glad I got this one to document now. And at first I was like, there's a few things I don't like about this one. Maybe not the perfect one for my collection, but now it's, gotta hold on to that. But the other thing is the fretboard. I've been telling you guys ebony. However, if you actually find the old spec sheets, you might see that it says rich light. Please keep in mind that was updated. Remember, government raids were happening at this point in time. To this day, I have only seen one actually have the rich light fretboard, and it was a really late 2012 serial number. The bulk majority of these do have ebony boards, which I can confirm this one has. You can also find 2 different styles of tuners on these. This is the Schaller version. I personally prefer the Grovers. I just think they look better, and I usually associate those with the earlier ones, so I don't know, that maybe there's a little bit of disconnect there. I think for me, it just comes to the Grovers actually have physical branding on them, whereas these just look like cheapy knockoff tuners that don't have anything saying, hey, I'm such and such brand. Now, if you're curious how much one of these is going to run you, let's just say expensive. These are in dire need of a reissuing, and I'm not sure we're gonna get it, unfortunately. Because even if you don't like Buckethead, please still try one of these one day. You will thank yourself. It's a really magical experience. And just because it's baritone scale length, don't be freaked out about that. You do not have to use heavy gauge strings on here. You can still tune it up to regular tuning just fine. In fact, I find that's where the true beauty behind these lie, because many baritones are actually a little bit longer than 27. Like 27's just barely into baritone scale length. Many try to be in that 28 to 30-ish range. So this hits that kind of interesting sweet spot there. But this one needs a little bit of help in the fret polishing department and some fresh strings. So while I do that, let me tell you the rest of the story. It was a viewer in Australia who tipped me off to this one. He had sent me a link to this saying, hey, are these good deals? So there's this guy that has a Buckethead Signature and a Buckethead Studio, and these prices were just way too good to be true, especially from Australian standpoints. I mean, to put things into perspective, mainly on his Studio, he had it for $2,500 USD. I mean, those have been bringing like $6,000 in the US market, so I told him, be cautious. I'm very certain that's a scam. Like, the true Signature wasn't as good of a deal, but since I considered us friends, I thought, you know what, I should scam bait a little bit here, see what's actually going on. Because the problem was, the listing was using stock photos from Guitar Chimp and like some other dealer. So the guy had no original photos on his listing, and that's a huge red flag and against Reverb's terms of service. So I basically reached out saying, hey, I'm interested in both of these. Can you provide some original photos of them, like, you know, together? Now, in the meantime, the Studio sold. And it took many days for this guy to actually get back to us with real photos. And in the meantime, my friend in Australia, he got kind of turned off by the whole situation after his talks with the seller. But lo and behold, I did eventually get authentic photos of it. So I lobbed it back into my buddy's court saying, okay, it is real. I'm not going to take this from you. If you want it, go ahead and take it. But then he lobbed it back to me. It's like, oh no, man. Then I lobbed it back to him. We were just in that awkward situation where it's like, I was just scam baiting, trying to see if it was real. But if you don't want it, I will take it. And then the seller eventually, you know, it clicked who I was. He wanted to sell the guitar to me. And that's when my friend decided that, okay, I am going to go for it. So I offered, I'll just have him ship it to you and say you're my forwarding agent. But he just decided that he would rather it come to me. We get the video and all that. So kind of an interesting story there. But man, I wish I could have got that Studio. That was a steal. Because not only was that Studio a great deal, but it was also the version with the locking Grover tuners, which that's one of the harder specs to find on the Studio models. Most of those were primarily the Schallers. I mean, I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I paid $8,000 for this particular Buckethead. And in today's market, they've been fetching that $7,000 to $10,000. Some people are asking as much as $12,000. Are they getting that? Not necessarily. So it wasn't a steal of a deal, especially once I had to pay for shipping from Australia to the US. But hey, now that I know that it's the 5-banded example versus the common 7, I'm happy there. But during the process of this, the seller realized who I was. He watches the show. He's a fan. Everything shifts from, I'm suspicious of you and your strange listing, to, okay, all right. We've got a real guitar here. It was just a guy who was very, very low on time. Selling guitars is not what he was doing. He had duplicates of each of these, so he's just clearing out his inventory in the best way that was possible for him.
Inside our first edition Buckethead. If you can't remember how many bands the first runs have, and you're out in the wild, because it does get confusing, just remember, if you've got 2 layers of black, it's the early version. The later versions have 3 layers of black in it. But here's a good side-by-side comparison to pure white versus the color this one is. Now, as far as Bucketheads go, this one, it's not too bad. Like, it's not perfect, but you're not going to get perfect. These things just age with time. I want to take special mention of these pickups. Look at the coloring. It's double white. So I've been documenting these guitars for like 10 years at this point. I've noticed many of them actually get more of a creamy color neck, so there must be some sort of a bobbin change throughout the run as well. So if you ever see a Buckethead that has aged a lot and then the pickup looks like somebody's replaced it, it might still be original. But these things actually come with hot ceramic humbuckers. This is the 496R in the neck, and your bridge pickup is the complimentary 500T. And if somebody has replaced them in your guitar, you can pull them out of that SG baritone. Those are a lot less expensive. So if you borrow the pickups from one of those, whatever you lose on the resale market of that is your true cost of the pickups. Because outside of this model, the only other one that used this color wiring on the 496R 500T set is the Studio Pinstripe model, which you might think would be absolutely silly to do on a Buckethead. But you gotta remember, some really tall guys actually seek these out because they just feel better for them and they want a Les Paul, so they might not necessarily want the Buckethead sounds. For example, I documented one here that someone put Steve Vai pickups in. That one was just too hilarious not to document. But here we can see our neck pickup cavity. It's short neck tenon AW for Alpine White, and our bridge pickup cavity LPBH for Les Paul Buckethead. It is a chambered body, so this looks a little bit different than usual. I don't remember seeing that on my other Bucketheads. But if you look over here, you can see where the maple top joins onto that mahogany body. I'm curious though, is the Buckethead top actually thicker? I don't think so. Still about a 3/4 inch. But you'll notice that these pickups have gray wires instead of the normal braided ones. That's because we've got fancy wiring over here. So this is a push-pull pot on our white speed knob that splits both the bridge and neck pickup. You don't have control over that. This is just a regular pot. But now if you're curious what these red buttons do, they're kill switches. They give you an interesting stutter effect. Buckethead uses it as a alternative way of picking is kind of a way to put it. Like you have to have some serious finger strength right here to hit the note hard enough. But once you get used to doing that, then you can use this as, kind of a stutter / picking effect. It's cool. Here's another hard part to replace. Unfortunately, if you've lost or broken your original Buckethead red one, there are sellers on eBay that have them. However, usually they're metric in style, so you have to drill out the center to make them fit. To be honest, I'm suspicious this might be one of those. I haven't seen an original in a while. In fact, I'm pretty confident that's what this one is. It is not original. That's right, that is something that makes this guitar different. Your toggle switches move from there down there. It's just something you have to get used to. And it's a master volume, master tone. And why do we have 2 kill switches? It's because certain riffs feel better to play at different locations. I personally find myself using this one more because it's just a bit more comfortable. But if you have to do 2-hand tap stuff and have a thumb here, you could do stuff like that, or it's just a little bit easier. Bucket likes to have both. And if the true signature is too expensive for you and you're trying to spec out your own or you're buying a Chinese replica, there's always white toppers you can put on a regular set of 496R 500T pickups. But what the replicas never get right is the body size and the baritone scale length. They always just make them a regular Les Paul, and it's not the look that you want with these things, it's everything about it. So a regular Les Paul is 9 inches, 13 inches, but a Buckethead is 10 and then about 14 1/4. So just about 1 more inch in each dimension. However, it feels much larger, which might not sound like a lot, but when you're used to something, it is quite crazy. Because it's about 19 inches long from where the neck joins into the body, where a normal Les Paul is about 17 1/4. It varies model to model, but that's just what I measured on my Les Paul Classic. And then these kill switches are Sanwa branded. They're actually meant to be an arcade cabinet style switch. They work incredibly well in my opinion. But people always want to know the size of the button because they sell 2 different ones. So you got 0.76 for just the button, and the surround is just a little over 1 inch. I suppose millimeters might be better because that's how Sanwa sells them. So that puts you closest to their 24 model. I'm not sure if there was a variation at this time or they take their measurement from somewhere else on it, but the 24 model is what you're after. But now let's talk bridge and tailpiece. Nothing fancy, honestly, just a regular Nashville style bridge, PW branded. We've got a full weight tailpiece by API. And from the factory, no pickguard. That's right, there are some crazy people out there that put the pickguards on. And when I first unboxed this, before I noticed the whole binding thing, what turned me off is if you get it in the light just right, you can see the center seam line of our 2-piece top just barely showing. It's not overly obvious, but it was there enough to catch my eye, and I hate it when guitars do that, because it's just lacquer sink. It doesn't happen to all of them, but it will happen to many. But when it gets really bad is when the finish starts to chip around there and then you just have this giant line up your guitar. But after polishing, I only saw a few minor dings. Another small one there. So pretty well kept, all things considered. But now, I cleaned our fretboard. Not only do I get to report that yes, of course this is a true ebony, but it's a figured ebony board. You don't find that on all of them. Figured ebony is kind of cool but pointless at the same time because it's just so hard to see in regular situations, but there was no way to know that without cleaning off the gunk and polishing the frets. Another model that uses a stock ebony fretboard that is figured is the Guitar of the Week. We talked about that one here. But also in cleaning, I found somebody dinged our fretboard. Now I have heard you could potentially steam those out. However, First run Buckethead is not the guitar I want to learn to do that on, especially when we're right here by the body. Too much could go wrong. I think I'll leave it as is, and then maybe another day we'll consider trying the steaming process. But if the Baritone Scale Length was not enough to pique your interest, did you notice the Buckethead Les Paul has 24 frets? That's right, it's a full 2-octave scale. You do not get that on Les Pauls very often at all. And it doesn't look weird. We don't have to have a neck pickup that's all like scrunched down right here. So I guess now it makes sense why they added another extra inch to the body this way. Buckethead's a madman, but he knew what he was doing. There you can see your very tiny side marker inlays on this first run. Then the other thing that makes these cool is the fact that you do not have any inlays at all. For the nut, I measure 1.71 inches, 12th fret, 2.15, pretty much 0.9 at the first fret neck depth, and 0.97 at the 12th. And here's visual confirmation of our 27-inch scale length with a 12-inch fretboard radius. Here's a look at that neck profile, first fret and 12th fret, just a nice rounded C shape. And now here's a look at our headstock. Remarkably clean for one of these. It's not all that uncommon for Bucketheads to get finish checking, and this one is very minimal in that aspect. Also, this is common for all white headstock Gibsons, that they tend to age the most. This one's not too noticeable. But per Bucket spec, he just wanted a black silk screen. It's one of those few times where I think it just looks good. But I realized another reason while taking the strings off of this one why I prefer the Grovers. These locking Schallers have such a small profile at the top. They don't have much of a profile / post sticking up, and that just changes the way the guitar looks. But now I'm happy because of the binding situation. Now I have a reason to have both in my collection. So I'll find a locking Grover one another day. But our truss rod is good on this one. It's just black. And please watch the straightness of the necks if you're buying one of these. I have had a twisted neck Buckethead before, and it was not a mild twist either. It was like all badly corkscrewed. However, I've never found another one with an issue. But if you're like, hey, why does this not have binding on the headstock? It actually does. It's just a little bit different than usual. I think what they do is they actually put a black headstock cap still on it, but then they paint it over white and scrape off the finish along the edge. So my guess is what you're seeing here is a black phenolic material rather than your usual binding. Now to support that theory, if finish were to chip around one of these tuners, you would actually see black. Now, I'm not going to do that, but something has happened over here by our screw button. Yeah, chipped finish shows black. So that pretty much 100% confirms that they just put the regular headstock veneer on it, then painted it, then did that. So, I mean, you're technically wrong if you say it's got binding on the headstock, but it does have a black layer, and that's also true on the Studios. However, on the true Signature, it typically is thicker. Moving on to the backside, I would say this is considerably more yellowed than the top. And just like the front, there is a very slightly visible seam line on the back of the body here. I'm not sure if that'll really come across on camera, but that likely means this is a 3-piece body, which most people aren't crazy enough to refinish one of these unless they're just redoing the clear to make it look perfectly white. I've seen a few of those where people gave it a poly finish so it doesn't age again. But as far as stripping it down to natural, these things are too expensive to do that to now. I mean, to keep things in perspective, these were only like $4,000 brand new. Here's a peek inside our inside control cavity. We've got a regular Gibson branded pot. This style of push-pull pot that they were using briefly before they switched into the black-backed one. And just a regular 3-way toggle switch. And a look at our Sanwa kill switch. I've never noticed it before, but this cavity seems extra deep. Which now that I think about it, I've never actually measured a Buckethead. No, it's the same thickness as a regular Les Paul, about 2 inches. But that would vary where you take it on the carved top. But that cavity is about 1.1 inches deep. And don't forget we can take a peek at this one too. Also Sanwa branded. The back plates are also white. Both of these actually have plastic film over top of them yet. I wouldn't suggest getting too excited about that if yours also has it, because it's very common for owners not to take that off. But if your back plate starts to yellow, you can remove that and then it's a stark white again, which can sometimes be a bit too blinding. Finish checking in this area is extremely common on white Gibsons, especially these Bucketheads. This one's actually really minor. Sometimes they get quite ugly in this area and start to look like they're cracking apart or falling apart. Like this one has a small finish check line right here and right over here in the common areas. But sometimes you'll see them run off the binding around here as well, but this one's pretty decent in that aspect. Another problem area for these is around the nut. This one's got a fair amount of that right here. However, some of them get really nasty looking. So don't be too scared if you see this on one. It doesn't necessarily mean it's been broken. Let's just say I'm really glad the side you see while you're playing just has two very minuscule ones. Moving up the back side of the neck, nothing too much to note here until we get to our tuners, the Schaller style. The serial number dates it to early 2010, the 69th day of the year. Initial batch for the day, production number 433 of all guitars stamped that day. The Made in USA 2010 is there. It's just kind of hard to see. And I see a small little ding right here and a bit more discoloration, kind of reddish in style. It might have been a stand or something, but no like giant blemishes. Now we can do a quick blacklight test. Everything is actually looking incredibly good on this one, like surprisingly good. That is really even. Except for maybe a little bit of a rub area right there. But this is always one of my favorite things about Buckethead Les Pauls. The fact that the pickup rings and pickups glow under black light, just this obnoxiously cool, ghostly color. I would totally suggest gigging one of these things with the black light on the stage, because it's just a lot of fun. I guess your kill switches glow in a certain way too. It's just not exactly as standoutish as that. And now we can look at the headstock. Yeah, everything looks good here. Here's the great thing about Bucketheads. Even though they're oversized, since they're chambered, they weigh about just like any other Les Paul. 9 pounds, 4.5 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this one sounds. About the Buckethead Les Paul is actually the coil split. When you have that activated with like some really raunchy distortion, it gives you that signature Buckethead tone. It's very cool. So for example, full coil sounds like this. But you split it and it gets super aggressive. Which is really crazy for the bridge pickup, but it really brightens up that neck pickup. We'll do that same test here. However, using the kill switches on clean, quite a loud effect to it. That's just normal on these. If yours is doing that, don't worry about it. The cool thing is once you start drowning it in distortion, that disappears while you're playing. there we go. A first run Buckethead Les Paul Signature documented on the show in its full glory. Are they going to be for everyone? Unfortunately not. I mean, they are giant Les Pauls. They've got some really quirky elements to it. Honestly, these pickups almost sound active. That's just how much they drive your amp. So if you're looking for really traditional, 57 classic style tones, this will not quite get you there unless you roll down your volumes. This guitar is all about control. You've got to use your volumes and tones. You got to play around with your kill switches for some fun. But really the hidden feature here has to be that coil splitting. It just gives you really good aggressive tones. Like when you hear Buckethead going super shreddy fast and it sounds really attacking, I would assume it's because he actually has it running on a split mode at that point in time. But sadly, I don't have the skills of Bucket, and I'm not going to try to say I do. But I'm really glad this thing exists because it's just a freak of nature, and I love it. But alright, Troglodytes, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please don't ask me about this one because I'm not looking to sell it. Take care.